From the front lines of the military to the front lines of business, this is Military to Management. I'm your host, Eamon. Each episode, we uncover how veterans are translating discipline, leadership, and mission-first values into success in today's corporate world. Hey, Ryan, thanks for joining me this morning. Really excited to talk to you about your military career, your transition, and what you're doing now. Some really good things and a really interesting path that you've taken to the success you've currently had. So let's just jump right into it. Tell us about your military career and what you did while you were in the military.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Eamon. I'm looking forward to chatting with you about all this. So my military career, around 12 years in the Marine Corps. Joined in late 88, primarily in artillery. Probably one of the most, I don't know if I want to call it boring jobs. I mean, there's fun times at it, but pull string, go boom. Held every role there from, powder monkey up through battery gunnery sergeant before I decided to move off into the civilian world in what I thought was going to be an IT career.
Amazing. Can you walk us through, you said you thought it was going to be an IT career. I know you had a very interesting kind of, let's say, weave or adjustments. Walk us through like what that was like when you transitioned. You thought you were going to IT and then, it took a different direction. Tell us a little bit about that and what your experience was.
Yeah, sure. So, after 12 years of being in the Corps, I started to get into computers and networking, and I found that I really enjoyed it, and I studied and put myself through a lot of certification testing to get my Microsoft and my Cisco certifications at the time. And this was back in 2000 or so. And, at the time, it's like, okay, I tried to see if I could move MOSs in the Marine Corps. And at the point, I had picked up Gunny the year before. There's no way they're going to let me change MOSs at that point. So it was, hey, we're moving you to Echo 211 and you're deploying in 9 months again. It's like, you know what? I just spent, 3 years in the drill field. Loved all of that. But I've got a teenage daughter at home, and I really think it's better if I stay with her. So I said, well, at the time I looked and saw that there was a lot of need for IT folks, and they were making pretty good money outside of the Corps. So I decided I'd get out and do that. And it was interesting because I didn't get out with any sort of plan. I still had the mindset that I had, back in the 80s. Well, I'll just go knock on doors until I find a job, and there's got to be enough jobs out there that I can find some company that's looking for somebody. There wasn't I don't even think LinkedIn was a thing back then, right? So it wasn't, if it wasn't as large as it is today to find a way to electronically network with other individuals or to maintain that network. So I got out and started applying at the different positions that I found, and I actually got picked up as a network engineer at a casino they were building nearby. And I was ready to start there, what I thought was a fair salary. And then the recruiter called me and said, hey, we've got to delay your start date by a week because the lead engineer left the role. You'll start a week later. Now, I had been interviewing at the time for a role with the company that is now Motorola. Now, when I was with them, Motorola was a customer of ours. They called me, and I didn't want the job because it was another management role. And after spending so many years, you know how it is in the Marine Corps, you're always in charge of something or someone at all times. So, I just wanted to be an individual contributor for a while, I thought. So they called and offered me the role, but because I didn't want the role, I put my salary requirements down at about 10 grand more than what the other company had offered me. I figured if they were going to offer me the role, they got to pay me more money because I really didn't want to be in charge of people. Well, not only did they offer me the 10 grand more, but they said, we've got to be fair to you and offer you the same that the outgoing manager was making, so it was like 12 grand more. So I couldn't really say no, but I'd still hoped it was going to be in charge of their software and software support. And so I expected to be able to keep working on that. But after maybe 6 months there, I realized it was pure management. I was never getting to work on the systems, the software, the network. So within 2 years, a role opened up on the sales operations side, and they had more money and they had more fun. So I figured I'd switch roles. It was operations and management no matter where I went. So let me move over to the sales operations side. So that's how it got me into more business operations as opposed to IT focused. Well, it's a long way around it, but that's how I got there.
Yeah, I know that's super interesting. One, it's great that your company did that, that they were fair. That's like a sign of a good company for sure.
Oh yeah.
A lot of companies don't do that. And I love how you were explicitly looking to not get into manage people, but your Marine Corps experience kind of brought you back to that. Were there any key like takeaways from your time in the military or from like that transition out of the military that you know are serving you well still today?
Yeah, one of the things that I found, and one of the reasons why I probably moved over into sales operations and ultimately into just pure operations that I didn't realize when I was in the Corps, is that probably the military in general, but certainly the Marine Corps, is very good at training everybody to be able to operate at a base level, right? Because you never know, leaves your unit, it's their time to EAS or PCS out, or you lose somebody, in an active combat zone. Everybody else has to be able to fill in, right? It has to be kind of plug and play up to a point. Not the most efficient, but everyone needs to be trained at that sort of level. And somehow, either I absorbed it over the years or it was just part of naturally my makeup, is being able to organize and understand how to break things down into their component parts to get things done had become natural to me. And what I noticed was it wasn't necessarily natural in the civilian world where there was a lot of tribal knowledge. People didn't understand the benefits of sharing the information and helping each other. Everybody always seemed to be, if I know it and I kind of hold on to it myself, then I've got job security. And I found that a lot as opposed to let's make sure everybody understands what their piece is, how to get it done, but ultimately what the goal is. It doesn't matter what the process matters, so you understand how to get to the result that you want. But we have to know how to go around things when they're in our way to accomplish the end goal. And just being able to organize that was something that I realized that I absorbed over the years and was good at.
Amazing. And something that definitely comes from your military experience. So,
I
and
think
that
so.
has continued to serve you well. Talk us through. So you get into sales ops. Like you're in a very interesting place in your career now. Can you kind of like bring us through the rest of your career to where you're currently at?
Yeah, sure. So I was in sales ops at that company, I don't know, maybe 6 years, six going on 7 years. But it had reached a point where everything was running so smoothly, there was nothing else to do. I had a great boss at the time, and his philosophy was, hey, if you can get your job done in 30 hours a week and go play golf on Friday, go ahead. And I'd kind of reached that point, and it wasn't challenging. There wasn't anything fulfilling about the role anymore. And there was no way to expand the role at that company. It was a smaller company. This is back in the early mid 2000s, and we were doing 50 to 75 million a year selling in the public safety space, 911 communication systems. We were the industry leader in that. But there really was nowhere else to go. My boss was the VP of sales, and his boss was a CEO. So there wasn't any other path. So I looked for other roles. Ended up picking up a director of business operations role for the Western region for a large copier company. And that exposed me to more business operations outside of just sales operations. So ended up with accounts receivable, fulfillment, commissions, other sales processing, all of this. So I kind of expanded my horizons a little bit. And then a few years later, a smaller company offered me their VP of business operations role to help them out. And so that just it sort of kind of stepping stone from there. Went from director of operations to VP of operations to another VP of operations, and then they decided that they wanted me to run all of the Americas for this other company, and they offered me what they called their chief operating officer role because they had one CEO, and then they had chief operating officers in the Americas and EMEA and APAC each. So and I've kind of been at that level at several companies since then. I was the president of a cycling products distribution company out here, one of the probably the top three in the U.S. at the time, and that was super interesting. I had full P&L responsibility at the first company that I was a COO for, And then when I moved from that to this one, also full P&L responsibility, but it really was different. There was less control. I had a board of directors, two parent companies that were working together to create this distribution company. So there was a lot more autonomy on my part, which was really interesting. Anything that I wanted to do within budget, it was up to me to make a success of the operation.
That's amazing. And that sounds like almost, the best case scenario. Uh, Manage the P&L and make all the decisions, and success kind of, goes with your decisions. What's a day in the life like for you now as a COO managing the P&L?
Yeah, so now I've kind of got a slightly different role now that I put myself in. I'm doing fractional COO for two smaller e-commerce companies and running my own business on the side. So as time went on, and I was working for several companies, some of them were e-commerce focused and you know, doing a pretty good job at what they were doing, albeit they were small, but they were profitable for the individuals who were running them. Well, I made one of them profitable. They weren't profitable before. And I realized there wasn't anything special about what they were doing. And a lot of it was operationally focused, which is something that I developed a good expertise at. And I said, well, I can do this myself with limited capital. So I decided to launch my own brand and my own company a little over a year ago and spend some time focusing on that with the goal of being able to, at least in the next 12 to 24 months, focus entirely on that. But in the interim, operating as the fractional COO for other e-commerce companies who are doing the same thing with different product lines. So, daily I'm looking at always looking at operating expenses, right? What's my SG&A and how's that in relation to the overall revenue? On the operational side, looking at my inventory turns and on-hand inventory, making sure that I'm optimizing the amount of inventory in the U.S. in our warehouse versus at the different e-commerce warehouses to be able to fulfill all of the orders that we're expecting to receive and we actually receive without running out of stock and without having too much stock, so we can leverage the other capital that we have for other products and other things we want to do. So those are always my primary focuses day to day to keep things running.
Amazing. Do you have like a way to, obviously your ultimate goal is to be, running your own thing, but you've got fractional stuff happening right now. How do you split that time up for those who might be, first listening to this and being exposed to like what fractional looks like, or the possibility of going fractional at some point in their career after they get out of the military? Like, how do you split that up? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so, and it takes a little while to figure out how to split it up best for you individually. I think at first I was probably spending more time working than I was prior because I always felt that, even though I might have a company that's contracting me for 20 hours a week, it never felt like 20 hours was enough. So I was, putting in extra hours on top of what I wanted to do on my own company, which meant that, I'm maybe doing 80 to 100 hours a week, 40 for them, 60 for me to try to get to where I want to get to. But eventually I had to go back to what I said earlier, is realizing that I'm fairly good at organizing and prioritizing and making sure that those things that have to get done, and those things that I'd like to get done, I do them when there's time in the schedule. But if they're not a must-have, then those are the things that it's okay to procrastinate on and to slow down. So I kind of segment my time a little bit throughout the day, how many hours that I'm going to put into my company versus the other companies that I'm working for. One thing that I find useful that I've done since I picked up in the Marine Corps is lists. And so each night I go through and I create a list. And this is old school because I still write it down. And I still put the little square boxes and I fill them in after I finish that throughout the day. Because somehow, visually for me, when I look down and I see the squares filled in, I realize I've gotten through those things. And I'm not in the back of my head worrying about, is there something more I have to do? I've set my list for the day of the things that I must accomplish, knowing there's other things that are always going to pop up that I'm going to have to address anyways. But as I go through the day and I fill those boxes in, I've accomplished what I set out to accomplish for that day. And so I realize that over time, that's helping me make progress. And I can track that subconsciously, maybe.
That's funny you said that. I actually used to do the exact same thing in the Marine Corps in the Green Monster with the square
Yeah,
box, check it off. I still do that today. So I'm glad you said that.
it
Well,
works for me. Yeah, it may not work for everybody, but it works for me.
organization, is a key thing that people take away from the military. So it's something that serves not all civilians are organized. Let's leave it at that. Are there any big shifts in the e-commerce industry that you're seeing right now? Like, talk to us a little bit about shifts or trends, where you think the future might be going with e-commerce, because I know it was very big, and then there's been some disruptions. Talk to me a little bit about that.
So I've seen disruptions maybe at a couple different levels. So before moving into pure e-commerce, I was with two larger sporting goods companies. One's the distribution company that handled a lot of different brands, and then moved into another sporting goods company that focused more on the action sports. Had maybe 15 different brands across skateboards and cycling. And what I saw being a big shift, and there were some upsides and downsides to this, was that the brands moving directly to D2C, direct to consumer, from their own websites and putting their products out on the larger platforms like Amazon and Walmart directly, which ended up competing with the local dealers, which had always been their bread and butter. And so you've got this loose network of thousands of bicycle dealers and shops across the country. For those that might listen who are cyclists, would know that there are a few shops locally to them that sell and work on their bikes and have all their gear. Moving to direct to consumer from the bigger brands really started to hurt those smaller, they call IBDs, independent bicycle dealers. And the same was happening on the skateboarding side, And so it works, I think, for short term for some of the bigger brands. If they've already established the brand, then they're able to reach directly to the consumer. The problem sometimes is that with that type of sport, people tend to want advice, recommendations. People that have been doing it for a long time, they know exactly what they want. They can go get it. And it sort of, I don't want to say dilutes the sport, but people don't have that same connection to the sport. They don't understand what they really need and what's better for them. They're seeing the marketing material that's put in front of them online. And then your local dealers, they're suffering and going out of business. So that's the downside for the dealers. The upside for the bigger brands is they're able to reach a wider audience faster.
When you're running these companies, what are some like the top KPIs, like one or two most important KPIs that you're looking at?
Oh, it's always a tough question because every KPI and metric has five underneath it that are important to support that top one, right? So
Yeah.
if I said at the highest level, I'm looking at my SG&A. What's my expense to run the business? And then underneath that, what are all the components of that? How much am I spending on marketing? How much am I spending on my sales team versus what they're bringing in, right? How much am I spending on warehouse space and my warehouse staff? What am I, if I was looking at pure operations, how many units am I shipping out per body in the warehouse? And what should that be at the cost per body for me to be efficient and profitable, right? So let's say if I say I need to ship, daily, if I break it down into packages instead of profit, if I need to ship, 25 packages per body in the warehouse, am I getting that? And if I know on the back end what each person's costing me and what my average value is to ship out, then I can tell if I'm doing a good job. If I'm not, at a higher level, when I look at that, if I see that trending down, then to me, there could be a problem in my warehouse operations, my fulfillment operations. Is it systems or is it people? Why is it that we're trending down if I have a backlog of orders but I'm not getting enough out per day? And do I need to make changes there? So those are some of the things that I'll look at to help point me in the right direction, because you can't look at everything at all the time. You've got to figure out, when something is an outlier or when it's going outside of the norm to know that that's where you need to focus for now.
Well said. Well said. Where do you see yourself? I kind of already alluded to this, but where do you see yourself and or the companies that you run / own in the next 6 to 12 months?
So it's one of the companies that I'm working as the fractional COO for right now. I think they have a great product. They're just now really getting moving, and so I expect to see them. This year they'll probably only do 1.5 million to 2 million, but I think that as they move forward within the next 24 months, they're going to be up in the $5 to $8 million range quickly, with good margins. For my own company, probably going to kind of split my focus between e-commerce and some of the no bid government contracts, because some of the products that I sell, they're focused on the emergency response section, and I've picked up a few U.S. suppliers of those products. So now I'm able to start competing for some of the city, state, and federal contracts, and so I think that that's probably a focus. Maybe I can leverage some of my time in the military. I don't have the same connections anymore, but I understand the system and I understand the needs, and so I think that's where I want to push things. And then, I would probably like to retire in the next 8 to 9 years.
Amazing. If you had a magic wand to fix any problem that you have in front of you or any obstacle that you have, like, what would that be?
Oh, if I had a magic wand, lower advertising costs online. That's an
That would be
easy
a
one.
great.
That would be the
Yeah.
easiest one for me to choose. It's the hardest one to accomplish.
Right. Advertising costs, they're never. It always seems like they're never going to get better. They. It's just it's a continuously growing cost, and you just need to continue to make sure the margins are working.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think that's where I find that some of the e-commerce companies or people that are going into e-commerce underestimate and under budget when they go to launch and then launching new products, is how much they're going to need to invest in advertising up front. And if you haven't budgeted for that, you can be very disappointed in the first few months, because you're going to pay to sell your product. That's really what it
yeah.
comes down to. You're paying people to buy your product. You're not making any money. It's all just cash after cash.
Do you find, is there anything that you've found that helps with that? Is like building the brand something that can over time help lower advertising costs? I know that's a strategy a lot of people try to do, is strong brand presence to over time reduce that paid media. Have you seen that work effectively?
Yeah, I've seen it work effectively, but I kind of go back to what I was saying. If people, I think, underestimate what it takes to do that, and the investment that it takes, right? To build a brand, I found that it's important that you be everywhere all the time, in the simplest form. Oh, I say that, but depending on what your brand is, you're going to want to position yourself across all the different platforms where people are on, and everybody's on some sort of platform at all time. Whether or not you are, on Google and you're paying to be on there before people start finding you organically. Before Google ranks you organically, you've got to pay to be up there. Whether or not you're putting out videos both on YouTube and on TikTok, and you're on Instagram, and what you're doing on Facebook, what sort of email marketing campaigns you're putting out, where you're getting those lists from to send stuff out, and what sort of content you're putting out there. And at first, just to make people aware of your brand. And it's one of those, go back to an old movie, build it and they will come. You've got to build your brand presence before anybody starts actually spending money with you. And it takes a lot of time, effort, and sometimes expertise. There are a lot of tools out there that make it seem like it's easy, but if you're someone like me who's not overly creative, very good operationally, but not so good creatively, it's a challenge to do it on your own. So you've got to get the people that know how to do it and can do a good job for you.
So, Ryan, you've had a very successful career. You climbed the ladder and are now, making the next jumps into doing some fractional COO, running your own business, getting that freedom. If you were talking to somebody today who was either recently got out of the military or was thinking about getting out of the military, is there any distilled advice you would give them if they're not looking to go into government somewhere else, but they're looking to go into business, or even whatever they're trying to do? Do you have any advice for that person?
Yeah, so I think that some of the advice that I would offer is one, make sure that you're not focusing on the job that you had in the military, and instead look at all the things that you learned in the military that are transferable to the civilian sector, right? So, man, I shot cannons for a living. Nobody wanted me to shoot cannons in the civilian world, right? But there were a lot of transferable skills that I had learned that I realized when I got out that a lot of civilians don't have. When you've gone from high school to college, right into the workforce, oftentimes you've learned what somebody trained you to do once you started your first job. You've only learned how to do things in that way. And I think in the military, we've been exposed to so many different things, but as I kind of alluded to earlier, we understand the framework of success. And we understand how to organize, how to prioritize, and the bigger thing is we understand how to make and the necessity to make decisions. I have found so often that civilians sometimes are afraid to make a decision. And, most of the military guys, and I tend to hire military people, they're not afraid to make a decision, understanding that as long as you have explained to them when you hire them that if you make a bad decision or you make the wrong decision, it's not the end of your career. Let's figure out why it was wrong, and next time don't make that decision, right? No one's going to get punished for that. But civilians seem to have the mindset that if I make the decision my boss doesn't want, then I may lose my job, and so I'm afraid to make any decision, and let me kind of push responsibility off on somebody else. So I would say look at the skills, the overall skills you have, and how that transfers to any role that you might want to pursue, and don't focus so much on the role you were trained to do while you were in the military, because you have a lot of transferable skills. And then figure out how to translate that into a resume and into a cover letter. And that there are a lot of companies that really value military experience because of those things. I can't tell you how often I found companies and bosses who value the fact that I wasn't afraid to make a decision and that I would act quickly and I wouldn't try to overanalyze everything for weeks before I came with a recommendation as opposed to the decision, because they hired me to do a job. So it's up to me to make the decision and do the job and tell them, one of the things I picked this up years ago. I think I might have read it in the Harvard Business Review or something, and I think it was the 4 levels of problems and solutions for employees. And the first was, boss, this is my problem, fix it for me. The second one, boss, this is my problem, how do I fix it? The third was, this is my problem, this is what I think we should do. Do you agree? And I always tell people up to number 3 is acceptable. 1 and 2 is never acceptable. But number 4, which was this was the problem, this is what I did. That's where we want everybody. And most military people that I've worked with are not afraid to get to 4 quickly. So yeah, I tell people to keep that in mind. There's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, 4 is where you want to be. If you want to continue to advance your career, 4 is absolutely where you want to be. Such a great piece of wisdom to share there, Ryan. Ryan, if any of our listeners want to reach out to you or see what you're doing, how do they find you? How do they find your company? Tell us.
Yeah, sure. So the easiest way to find me is I'm at rborders at emblemoutdoor.com. That's my personal business. So you could also find the personal business online at emblemoutdoor.com. So that's probably the easiest way. I'm also on LinkedIn, so I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out to me there. And I love working with vets. So any help or advice I can offer anybody, I'm available for that.
Appreciate that, Ryan. Appreciate you taking the time to talk to me this morning. Thank you so much, and best of luck going forward.
Thanks a lot, Eamon. I enjoyed it.
Thank you to our guest for sharing their journey from the military to corporate leadership. We'll be back soon with more stories of veterans proving that success doesn't end with a uniform. It begins a new mission. This is Military to Management with your host, Eamon.